Imagine for a moment a small village that's surrounded by powerful enemies and with limited resources, transformed into the greatest power of the ancient world. It wasn't luck. It wasn't just brute force. It was strategy. Rome, with its relentless and pragmatic mindset, didn't just win battles. It shaped the course of history. But what few know is that the brilliance of Roman tactics is filled with lessons that go far beyond the battlefield. What if I told you that the way they organize their armies can be applied to your life, your work, or even the challenges you face today? Sounds like an exaggeration. It's not, because the Romans were masters of something we all seek, turning problems into opportunities. They didn't cling to what didn't work, and every change they made was calculated, cold, and strategically perfect. If you think their success was just military might, get ready to change your mind. So why is this relevant to you? Because understanding Roman tactics is like opening a survival manual for any situation. Flexibility, discipline, adaptation, and innovation. All of this is embedded in Rome's strategic DNA. And the best part, these lessons are just as applicable today as they were 2,000 years ago. You'll discover how ancient Rome became an immortal empire and, at the same time, take away strategies that can change the game in your life. But beware, the answers lie in the details, in the small revolutions the Romans made in their way of thinking. And if you think you know everything about strategy, wait until you see how Rome did it. Ready to dive into the tactics that transformed the world and can transform your life? Let's get started. From the very beginning, Rome knew that a good military strategy was the backbone of any empire. With this in mind, the Romans adopted the phalanx system, inspired by the Greeks. Imagine a human wall formed by warriors side by side, so close that their shields and spears intertwined. The goal? To become a walking fortress, almost invincible. Despite the overwhelming strength of this formation, there was a hidden weakness: rigidity. On rough terrains like hills or forests, this powerful war machine ironically became slow and vulnerable. It's fascinating to think about how the Romans saw the phalanx as a lesson, not just a definitive solution. After all, copying the Greeks was only the first step, not the final destination. When facing agile tribes in mountainous terrain, they quickly realized that the solid block of soldiers couldn't keep up with the dynamics of the battles. Imagine a swarm of enemies, attacking quickly and disappearing before the phalanx could even turn around. What seemed like an impenetrable wall was, in fact, a trap for themselves. If you stop to reflect, you'll see how this applies to everyday life. How many times do we use a brute force strategy that seems foolproof but fails when faced with unpredictable variables? For example, at work, insisting on a single sales approach can be as rigid as the phalanx in a canyon. Maybe it's time to think about how to make your tactics more flexible, whether by customizing your pitch or learning more about the client before acting. Even with the limitations of the phalanx, the Romans still used it for important conquests, especially on flat terrain where it excelled. But this only reinforces the point. Understanding the context is vital for any victory. If Rome had relied solely on brute force, it would have been just another forgotten city-state in time. This lesson applies to any scenario. A wise strategist learns as much from triumphs as from failures. The true genius of the Romans began to emerge when they stopped copying and started innovating. They didn't cling to what didn't work. So they began to think beyond the rigidity of the phalanx, envisioning something more dynamic. But of course, this brings us to the next step in history, the transformation to the manipular system. And here, my friend, is where Rome started to shape its true military identity. Rome's greatness was never in its brute strength, but in its capacity to adapt. It was this that led the Romans to gradually abandon the rigid phalanx formation in favor of the manipular system. Imagine a chessboard where each piece, instead of following a single direction, can act independently yet still coordinate. This was the essence of the maniple. Small units of soldiers, highly mobile, ready to react to any unforeseen terrain or enemy. And how can you not admire this flexibility? It was as if Rome had learned to dance on the battlefield. This change wasn't just a technical matter, but a practical response to the difficulties faced in wars against the tribes of central Italy. Those hills, canyons, and dense forests were a nightmare for rigid formations. But the manipulars, they could disperse, navigate around obstacles, and regroup quickly. It's like in the modern world, survival isn't about being the strongest, but the most agile. In the market, this means staying alert to changes and adjusting your course before the competition catches up. The Romans, with the maniple, showed that division brings strength. Dividing your army into smaller, more autonomous units was a brilliant military strategy. Think about how this applies to personal or professional life. Instead of trying to solve everything at once, why not break your problems into smaller parts? Whether it's a major career goal or a complex project, handling manageable pieces will always be more effective. A fascinating detail is that the manipular system also allowed soldiers to develop a sense of responsibility and initiative. Unlike the phalanx, where each man was just an immovable piece of a larger machine, soldiers in the maniple needed to think, act, and collaborate actively. It was a perfect balance between discipline and autonomy. If you lead a team, here's a tip: delegate trust and watch productivity flourish. But of course, not everything is as simple as it seems. The transition to the maniple was a gradual process, full of adjustments and learning. It's like in life, real changes take time and require the courage to abandon the old and embrace the new. And Rome, never satisfied with stagnation, continued its military evolution. The next step, an even more sophisticated system that would mark the peak of its versatility and efficiency on the battlefield. The true strength of a military strategy lies in specialization. This is exactly what Rome did by introducing soldiers with well-defined roles within the manipular system. Think of the hastati, the young men at the front line, full of energy and courage. Armed with swords, shields, and javelins, they were the ones who initiated the confrontation, wearing down the enemy with quick attacks. It was almost like in a board game, the first move, the initial impact. They weren't the most experienced, but their role was vital, and Rome knew how to maximize each soldier's potential. Behind them came the principes, the true pillars of the army. Veterans of past battles, these soldiers had the calm and precision that only experience provides. When chaos began to take over, there they were, ready to hold the line and turn the tide. It's like in a complex project. Sometimes the younger members start with all the energy, but it's the wisdom of those who have faced challenges that keeps everything under control. The principes were that security on the battlefield, a perfect balance between strength and strategy. Finally, at the back were the triarii, the last line of defense. Imagine older men with years of war behind them, armed with spears and unwavering patience. Their role wasn't to attack, but to save the day in the most critical moments. It was almost a saying among the Romans: the triarii have arrived. Things have gotten serious. This shows that even in modern situations, it's always good to have a plan B. That strategic reserve you only use when everything seems lost. This division of roles is a true lesson on how well-structured teams can overcome any challenge. Each soldier knew exactly what to do, and everyone trusted each other. It's like a football team. The striker doesn't try to do the goalkeeper's job, but together they work to win. In life, it's worth thinking, what's your role on the team? And more importantly, are you trusting others' roles or trying to do everything yourself? With these clearly defined roles, the Roman army gained unparalleled cohesion, where each soldier was an essential piece on the board. But time doesn't stand still, and Rome kept growing. The manipular system, though brilliant, soon needed to evolve into something even greater. It was time to take a step further and create a structure that combined specialization and standardization, the cohort system. As Rome expanded, so did the challenges. Conquering vast territories meant facing diverse enemies and unpredictable conditions. It was in this context that the cohort system emerged, a true revolution in military strategy. Unlike the maniples, cohorts were larger, almost self-sufficient units, composed of versatile soldiers. It was like turning several small gears into a powerful and cohesive machine. And the brightest part, each cohort could fight, build bridges, create camps, and even sustain itself in hostile lands without relying on another unit. This system was a direct response to the empire's expansion. Imagine governing regions as distinct as icy Germania and arid Egypt. The standardization of cohorts brought uniformity to the Roman army, allowing each soldier to be trained to act consistently no matter where they were. If a commander led a legion in Gaul or Judea, he knew exactly what to expect from each cohort. Think of it like a global company with well-defined processes. The secret to success lies in consistency, no matter the location. Moreover, soldiers began to be trained for more than just fighting. They were builders, engineers, and in a sense, administrators. When Rome invaded a territory, it wasn't just to defeat the enemy, but to leave its mark. Roads, fortifications, and even aqueducts were built by the legionaries themselves. And this practice not only consolidated Roman dominance, but also facilitated the army's movement. If you want to learn something from this, think about how developing multiple skills can make you indispensable. After all, being good at one thing isn't always enough. Another fascinating point is the autonomy that cohorts offered to local commanders. Each unit could operate independently, but without losing the connection to the legion as a whole. It's like giving your team the freedom to make daily decisions while always aligning with the company's larger goals. This combination of independence with centralized supervision was undoubtedly one of Rome's greatest strengths. And if it worked in a global empire, imagine how it can work in your project or business. With the cohort system, Rome not only adapted, but led. Its army was now faster, stronger, and more resilient, but the real secret wasn't just in the physical strength of the soldiers, but in the pragmatic mindset that guided every decision. And this brings us to one of the most fascinating aspects of this entire story: the Romans' ability to change the game when necessary, abandoning the old and embracing the new. Rome's true power wasn't just in its weapons or its well-trained army, but in its ability to think pragmatically. The Romans weren't afraid to change strategies when something didn't work, and this was essential for their survival and expansion. They faced Greek phalanxes, agile tribes, and organized armies, each with unique challenges. If a strategy failed, there was no room for pride. They adjusted, reinvented, and moved forward. How many times in our own lives do we insist on something that has already shown its limits instead of adopting a new approach? A classic example of this pragmatism was how Rome faced Hannibal in the Second Punic War. After several defeats, the Romans completely changed their strategy, avoiding direct confrontations and betting on attrition tactics. This game of patience turned the conflict in their favor. And this teaches us something valuable. Sometimes the best strategy isn't to attack, but to wait for the right moment. In the market or in life, knowing when to retreat can be as powerful as advancing. Additionally, the Romans had an impressive ability to absorb ideas from their enemies. If a technology or battle formation proved effective, they incorporated it into their own army. This is how they adopted the use of Carthaginian warships and Greek siege weapons. This type of strategic humility is rare but powerful. In practice, this means you should be open to learning from others, whether from competitors, partners, or even critics. Great ideas can come from the least expected places. Another important lesson is that the Romans knew no strategy worked forever. They didn't cling to the past out of nostalgia, but looked to the future with courage. That's why they abandoned the phalanx when it stopped being efficient, replaced the maniples with cohorts, and adjusted their tactics whenever necessary. For those reading, think about this. What are you still holding on to that you should have? Let go. Sometimes a painful change is what separates failure from success. In the end, Rome's pragmatism was more than a military strategy. It was a philosophy of life. It was this mindset that allowed the empire to survive centuries of challenges, adapting to every twist of fate. And this same mindset can be applied to anything, whether it's a career, a business, or even a relationship. But to truly understand the impact of these changes and how they shaped history, you need to dive deep into the ingenious tactics that defined Rome. Shall we talk about it? So what are you going to do with all this knowledge we've just explored? Rome didn't become a legendary empire just because it had a well-trained army, but because it applied innovative strategies, adapted to the unexpected, and above all, never stopped evolving. Now, the question is, are you ready to adopt this mindset in your own life, or will you keep insisting on strategies that have already proven not to work? Think about the lessons we've seen, the flexibility of the maniples, the strength of the cohorts, the specialization of the soldiers, and the relentless pragmatism that guided every Roman decision. Are you applying these tactics in your projects? Is your team, your career, or even your personal routine organized to win? The truth is, change begins when you decide to act. And Rome showed us that, with the right strategy, no barrier is insurmountable. Now, I want to give you a challenge. What's the first step you can take today to apply these teachings? Maybe it's reevaluating your priorities, delegating tasks, or even accepting that it's time to change direction. Whatever it is, remember, it's not about doing everything at once, but starting with a small strategic action, just like the Romans always did. If you feel inspired, don't let this moment slip away. Subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and join us on this journey of learning and transformation. There's still much more to explore about Rome, its wars, military strategies, and the history that continues to teach us. Are you ready to continue? Let's build your personal empire together.